Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm excited to host Bethel McGrew in the Yours Truly virtual studio. Bethel is no stranger to many in the corner, as she has had several conversations with Paul Vanderklay and is a regular guest on the channel Transfigured, hosted by Sam Tiedman. And I believe she is a friend of the Chicago Not Estuary meetup group that Sam also attends. But Bethel is not only a tangential conversational participant of this little corner of the internet, she's a writer. Her Substack, further up, its bio reads freelance writer, teacher, maths, PhD, cultural critic, bad Anglican. You might have spotted me at World Magazine, The National Review, First Things, The Spectator, The Critic, Plow, or someplace else. Someplace like this corner of the internet, which is where I found her. I know that I first bumped into Bethel speaking fluent evangelicalese on Sam Tiedman's channel some months back, and at some point followed her on X. In one of her conversations with Sam, I gathered that she was of the smart kind of folk, and she is a purveyor of culture. What recently grabbed my attention was a Substack where she wrote in response to the Wes Huff conversation on Joe Rogan. And as I'm remembering it now, she also had a recent exchange with Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire on X as he responded to her review of his recent movie, Am I Racist? But I digress. Bethel's journey with Christian apologetics was resonant to me in her reference to the Wes Huff conversation. And though I have since distanced myself from the propositional game, something about her piece triggered a point of redemption related to such things. So I reached out to see if she was available to have a conversation. But first, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, keep up, leave a comment to keep the conversation going. And if you want to support the channel financially, become a channel member. Link down in the description. I look forward to joining with you all as we practice some conversation craft today with Bethel here on the Yours Truly podcast, seeking to get to know her and also her work and join you in this digital, dialogical, cybernetic conversation. So without any further delay, I give you Bethel McGrew. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Bethel, thanks for meeting me here today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Christian. It's good to be here.
Yes. So I kind of outlined in the intro some of the things that really caught my attention with you. I've, kind of bumping into in this space we call something like the corner of the internet. And, the journey into this space, in and out of this space, like my first experience with YouTube, a lot of it had to do with like looking up, apologetics with John Lennox and Richard Dawkins and, why do I always go blank on his name?
William Lane Craig?
William Lane Craig and then all the new atheists and that whole scene. And then, conversations about evolution and young earth or intellectual design. And then, and if I just thought that if I could just get that one win, then I could like really, stand on solid ground in my faith. I'm just looking for that one, just like
that knock down argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and then, I had something happen in my life that was very painful and that, and that there was a part of my faith that came to life that wasn't really based on an argument at that point. And so that kind of made me feel less like those things were of lesser value or importance, but they definitely played a role. And the Peterson saga with New Atheism was also a real big part of that. And I referenced that in some of our communication about that piece you wrote at the end of last year about the passion of Jordan Peterson we'll get to. But so what was it, but I referenced the part that stuck out to me and you have a piece on your Substack further up. What was it about the Joe Rogan, Wes Huff conversation that really, captivated you in reference to like that whole scene? And tell us about your relationship to that whole scene yourself.
So you mean the apologetics scene?
Yeah.
Sure. So I've been this has been the water I've been swimming in my whole life practically, because both of my parents are very involved in apologetics. They're they're both philosophers. That's where they've published most of their academic work. But then when I was, I don't know, maybe 10, 11, this is going back a ways now, I'm 31 now, but they felt called to bring their philosophical skills to bear on the field of Christian apologetics. And it was William Lane Craig who kind of invited them into that space. And they contributed an article on Jesus' resurrection to an anthology, an academic anthology. So, and then they both got deeply into research, and they both really love history and biblical studies. And so they were pulling together lots of interesting research and stuff. So then I just grew up hearing a lot of these kinds of arguments. And so they built a lot of connections and networking stuff in that space. And then over time, they've had kind of a lover's quarrel, and various complications and issues have surfaced in more recent years, which maybe we can get into later, maybe not. It's some inside baseball. But that's kind of how I've come to this. It's like I've just kind of always known this stuff. It's just been in the air around the dinner table and so on. And so then seeing Wes Huff on Rogan was, for me, just a really fun, refreshing moment in this whole new evolving vibe shift, if we want to call it that, is kind of a religious, cultural vibe shift in how people think about Christianity. And what I discuss in that piece that you referred to at the beginning is that I think it was a kind of a gentle corrective, but a kind of an important corrective and a refocusing back on, okay, but let's look at the actual texts of the Gospels. Let's look at the concrete historical claims of Christianity and think about whether they make sense, whether they hang together in a way that left-brained people, so to speak. I'm not really a big fan of the whole left brain, right brain thing, but it's a useful shorthand. I think the gospel is for everybody, and that includes left-brained people. And I think what emerged is that Joe Rogan is kind of a left-brained dude. And like, he was nerding out, and really, I mean, Wes was pulling out onomastic congruence or something. Joe was like, whoa, that's super interesting. So it was just fun. It was fun to watch. And I don't personally know Wes, but we have like shared connections in apologetics world, including one very good mutual friend, Jonathan McClatchy, who got a shout out in the course of the show. And that, I was just thinking, like, wow, because nobody knows who Jonathan is. He's a very low key, behind the scenes sort of dude. But then to have his name like shouted out on the biggest podcast in the world was just very cool, and like kind of a vindication. And so I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening with this vibe shift, this new conversation, lots of interesting people out there. But I do think it's important to sort of go back and remind ourselves that the new atheists weren't really right about anything. Like, it's not just that the new atheists were boring and left-brained and not in tune with more mystical vibes or whatever. They didn't get anything right. Like, they were just wrong on all counts. Because I think there's an idea that sort of persists that, like, well, maybe they were right about like some of the trivial, boring stuff, but we just want to have cooler conversations now. I think you really have to completely exorcise the demon of Richard Dawkins, so to speak, from the culture in order to like really sort of level up. So for me, that's what Huff on Rogan was starting to do.
So, and for him specifically with Joe, because Joe would have probably, he didn't probably, he was kind of buddied up to that culture, say my boy Sam Harris and, Dawkins this or Dawkins that. And
kinda, yeah, a little bit.
And so what do you, so if if they were quote unquote, wrong about everything, like is it because, like, could you outline maybe a little more technically what that means? Like their starting point or their ontological, whatever, their presuppositions were, like, what was the specific thing that they built it all wrong off of? Obviously as a Christian, it's like that there is no God, but kind of a technical.
Yeah. Well, I mean, everything you were saying, like all of the ontological presuppositions, all of the so this is like a whole can of worms. unto itself, but I don't really accept the evolutionary framework as a good explanatory inference, even on the material level. I have serious doubts and questions that it could even explain how species physically got here, which obviously that's Dawkins' whole deal. So, I'm in touch with the intelligent design guys. You were mentioning them in the intro. That I think they've done very good work, which is often unfairly maligned. So that's a big piece for sure. And also, I think those guys had just a very shallow, like a surface level dismissal of the texts of the Bible, of the New Testament. I mean, when you go back and you read the books they wrote, I didn't actually grow up reading the books. I was too busy reading more serious atheists, in college. And then I kind of circled back in my 20s, like, oh, okay, I guess I should actually read what they wrote. And when you get to stuff like the Gospels or Jesus' resurrection, it's basically just, oh, and here's a footnote to something by Bart Ehrman or whatever, right? And it's like, okay, so they're just like just grabbing this stuff secondhand from their favorite pop biblical scholar and moving on. And that's just incredibly flimsy. That they're not, I would say they're probably not even aware of the best arguments because they never felt like they had to be. Like, what was the point? Like, just make some shallow arguments and move on. So yeah, and I mean, when I hear guys like, so Tom Holland has this new conversation that just came out with musician Nick Cave, and it's a fun convo. And they're sort of talking a little bit about faith and reason. And Holland is one of those guys who really struggles to put his left brain and his right brain together, so to speak. He loves the idea of getting a kind of a tingly sense of faith, like a glimpse of the numinous, or a sense that like maybe something miraculous happened, and he's always reaching for that kind of an experience. But then he's saying, if I think too much, basically it goes away. It's like walking on a tightrope and looking down. And he said that there's this voice in the back of his head. It's like, oh no, am I betraying Richard Dawkins if I explore this, or if I allow myself to believe or have faith? And then he's like, well, I don't really care what Richard thinks. But I think what he means by that is, am I betraying the part of myself that's telling me this is all nonsense? It's telling me we have natural explanations for everything and blah, blah, blah. The Gospels aren't really what people think they are, all this sort of stuff. And for Tom, he really hasn't reached the point yet where he's integrated enough to put those things together. He's still kind of compartmentalizing. And so what I would like to help people do is move towards a place where they don't have to compartmentalize. They can integrate all these parts of themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting that the way that the Holland thing is, I think I read that in that piece that you wrote, but that he feels like it's a betrayal, not just of Dawkins, but like maybe, reading into that as a portrayal of self and years of an identity, rooted in something akin to the new atheist identity. And I think that is even because we talk about the vibe shift to something where religion, Christianity has more cachet than it did in the previous 10 years, previous 15, 20 years. And that the betrayal of that self, it held so much cultural power, so much cultural cachet in the West, those names, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and if Hitchens had lived longer, like there was a lot of powerful, easy mimetic kind of like dependence upon that for cultural cachet.
Right. And of course, nothing those guys ever said was new. I mean, they were called the new atheists, but really they were just wheeling out, stuff that was like all the new hotness in the 1800s, right? Like you go back, I remember reading a fascinating book about like some of the history of the Victorian crisis of faith, and some figures who actually ended up reconverting. Like first they doubted, they lost their faith, and they went on this journey of coming back. So we're almost seeing a repeat of that playing out. But you go and you read some of the skeptical arguments that persuaded them or arguments they used themselves, and thinking, my gosh, it's like there's Hitchens, there's Harris, like all the stuff they're using. It's just there's nothing new under the sun, really.
Mm, that's really fascinating. It seemed I've told this story before, but man, this was 2009, and I was working at a church camp doing the music, and a bunch of the people on staff, we go to like Barnes and Noble, and I can remember seeing this giant tower of silver God delusion books, like being, just visually, and it was like, is everything I'm doing a delusion? Like, like just even that, just the power of how, I know it seems like O'Connor is wanting to downplay the new atheist movie. Oh, that was just a publishing phenomenon. Like everyone's kind of like backing away to like, but that was like an icon of something in like a big, powerful corporate reality. Like,
It
um,
was, yeah, and I think there are other interesting cultural elements at work here. I think the fact that most of them, Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett were the exceptions here, but Dawkins and Hitchens, at least, were British. Um, so I think, and they were very good writers. They were excellent writers, excellent rhetoricians. They kind of had the benefit of the British educational system, and they knew the King James Bible. It just, they could put a sentence together. So probably it was destabilizing for a lot of younger Americans reading that work for the first time, who just weren't prepared for that kind of rhetorical onslaught on their faith in a British accent,
yeah, that's really interesting. Relating that the power of or oration, in that narrative that was put forward. Um, so yeah, I mean, so you've had your life. A big part of it was, as you were raised. This, like I mentioned, kind of, I heard her and Sam speaking evangelicalese. I was raised very much in the evangelical culture. I'm a little bit older than you by about 10 years. So like the 80s, like I came out listening to the Christian pop of the 80s. So that's what we were. It's not the highbrow kind that you were a part of. It's like the lowbrow kind, but like,
Oh, I don't know. I mean, so I actually, like, in terms of the music I like and that sort of stuff. My 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 parents actually gave me a very good education in just Christian pop, CCM. So I grew up on CCM
okay,
radio. Um,
gotcha.
I know my Amy Grant. I know
Okay.
my Michael
Yeah.
W. Smith, my Stephen Curtis Chapman. Like,
Okay. Yeah. So that's what you can kind of just like, you can find that frequency in a certain experiences that people had in that realm. And I think that the journey of that, I mean, even that culture just being completely feeling, eviscerated or attacked by, it's like your whole identity of being raised is being attacked culturally, and and very well at what it felt like for me in those times. And so that's why it was, you know, um, I felt like Tim Keller was a really important um, voice in that. I know Paul kind of talks about him being kind of like the pre Jordan Peterson thing, but things happened even from there, um, about rationalism, and you mentioned earlier about kind of the views on like evolution, and I'd be interested to kind of hear your story. You've probably shared it more if you've had a conversation with Paul, or I don't know, but like, um, but even to just to look at your article that you wrote about the passion of Jordan Peterson, you said a line in there that really, really stuck out to me. Um, you said, and I don't have it written down, but it was like people were looking for this Christian or that scientist, and what people didn't realize that they were getting was like actually a really great humanist.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I was saying that um, yeah, I'd have to pull that up. We have good polemicists. Um, we have lots of like interesting communicators. Um, we have like very witty, clever speech makers. Um, but Peterson was bringing more than just intellectual cleverness or rhetorical firepower. He was bringing the human element of being somebody who really cares, and being somebody who just loves people and is trying to use his platform um, to help them, and beyond politics. And a lot of the discourse around Peterson, this is part of what I was getting at as well, that he was kind of a political lightning rod. And so, like the pronouns wars and that stuff. Not that I think that stuff is unimportant, um, but it was interesting that those were the moments that sort of went viral around Peterson, when they were like the least interesting thing about him. Um, and so it wasn't just that he was out there being politically provocative, being a gadfly. He had something, he had a mission in a way.
And I mean, the part when you said like he was a great humanist, in which to a degree it means like he cared about the person, and then you referenced a story that he used to share at some of his conferences about one of his clients that that it seemed like he really wanted to help her, and then he continues that in a way, initially with like all the young men that are paying attention to him, and I think even in that article you said something like people were not, they were looking for that the dad, I can't, or the father figure that they didn't have, and they were
Yeah.
looking for all those pieces. And I've tried to explain to people at different times about what it is, why when they hear a clip or a tone of him, or whatever, or somebody talking about them, that's like about Peterson, that I don't know, I just don't like the way it comes. I'm like, oh, I don't know how to get to that
Yeah.
that
It's,
that piece.
yeah. Well, a lot of people, especially people who are more left leaning, um, they're gonna be, they've been handed a certain low resolution snapshot of Peterson, and like they've heard, oh well, isn't he kind of a misogynist or something? Like I heard, yeah, not much you can do for those people.
Yeah. So how, what is there a through line between, we've talked about atheists and new atheist apologetics, kind of Peterson phenomenon, and how I don't think that it's untied to the, you mentioned also intelligent design with gosh, I'm going blank on names.
Steve Meyer
He
being a,
was on Dr. Myers was on Rogan 6-8 months ago, and then Wes Huff, like there was a cultural softening that I think all these things are connected to.
mm,
I mean, do you feel, is that kind of your opinion?
yeah. I was pleasantly surprised to see Steve get on Rogan, but maybe I shouldn't have been, because Steve's a pretty well connected guy. They both knew the same astrophysicist or whatever, so it's like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense for Steve. But in a way, it was kind of a bigger deal for a guy like Wes Huff, who's um, in a smaller niche, and like not as well connected out there. But um, but Steve is another evangelical guy, even though he doesn't do Christian apologetics per se. Um, he is kind of doing like gentle pre-evangelism in his own way. And I thought Steve did a good dialogue with Tom Holland and Douglas Murray a while ago on common knowledge, where he, just kind of gently poking at some of those presuppositions. Um, and yeah, I also think in general, I read an article called Two Cheers for Intelligent Design, and sort of talking about how there's been a growing lack of trust in scientific establishments, um, in consensus. People are coming to suspect that maybe they're being lied to about a lot of different things, and like certainly you see with the transgender nonsense or whatever, or COVID. And I think that's one piece in the cultural softening, like a general anti-establishment mistrust. And Joe mentioned this talking with Wes as well. He's like, yes, there's this sort of consensus view that like all the smart people are atheists, but um, it seems like they're saying that about a lot of different things, and people are just no longer willing to write a blank check um, to establishment people and what they think about stuff.
Yeah, I think there was this myth or this ideal that the scientific method could be the baseline morality for a process that would remove morals from, and then also peer review, could remove the person and the moral grounding. It could just operate on its own blindly, and I think, to your point on recent, cultural and scientific events in our society, that the trust has been broken with the expert class and the institutions thereof. And I know. So what do you see that doing to our culture in the near future?
We'll see. I mean, we're now like a couple weeks or whatever into Donald Trump's second term, and like I'm not really a political animal. I'm interested in politics to the extent that politics affect people, and I'm very socially conservative. It's a lot of what I write is in a faith and culture sort of vein, social conservatism specifically, but I have a friend named James Wood who writes a lot in this area too, and he talks about how Christians should look for reality respecters. People who they may not have been raised in a Christian context. Religion might be a little bit alien to them, but they'd like to be able to hold on to certain basically true things, and they see those things being flatly denied in the public square or denied by the establishment, and they're like, wait a minute, what's going on? It isn't anything true? Surely we should be able to agree about that. So there's an opportunity for Christians to come along and say, I agree with you. Like, you are in touch with something true. You are seeing the world as it really is. Now, let me kind of suggest a way to frame that, a way to make all of it make sense. So I'm hopeful that increasingly we'll have chances to connect with people in that vein. And I think too that I'm not exactly sure. I think there can be some overexcitement over voices like Holland or Peterson. I think sometimes Christians can rush to be like, oh, are they going to convert tomorrow, or what is this? Or, oh wow, like a non-Christian is making positive noises about Christianity. It's so cool. And I think there's a danger of us looking a little bit needy. Like, we don't necessarily need them to approve of us. But what I do think guys like Peterson and Holland are doing in the culture that's very helpful is just a general opening up of the door, a general opening up of the conversation, to where people feel like it's not stupid, it's not crazy to think about this stuff, to explore this stuff. And then what happens, I think, is a lot of people, as they get deeper into it, they pass Peterson, they pass Holland, and get to the point where they're able to make a commitment, even when those guys are still hanging back. So I think God has definitely used them in fruitful ways in that sense.
There's an interesting phenomenon around that I see on Twitter mainly, is people that have passed through that, that now will look at somebody like Jordan and denigrate him and his work, and that honestly kind of upsets me. It's like, oh, or I don't know if upsets the word. I just see I don't know if foolishness, or it's probably in some realms of immaturity just by nature of age, but it's like, instead of
it's like they feel like they've outgrown him in a way, that they're like, oh, maybe they're embarrassed by what their younger selves were into, like kind of like that band you thought was really cool when you were a teenager, and you're like, oh,
yes,
I liked that band. Yeah, that may be true. Now, I think there are things to criticize with Peterson, and I
right,
try to be honest and kind of even-handed. things he does that genuinely do frustrate me. So I think it's important to name those things honestly, but at the same time, I know what you mean. I do see a tendency to just kind of shallowly say that he's cringe, or say that he's a fraud or he's insincere, um, that kind of stuff. And I don't think he's ever been insincere. I think that's one thing you can say about him. Like, he's always been the real deal. It's just that he's kind of weird. He's just kind of an eccentric, but that's why some of us like him. I mean, I know I personally I kind of have a soft spot for eccentrics. So I just like, let's let him be him.
Yeah, it's just there's I think your point about the band is apt, and I guess part of maybe something that I've been doing is, even for myself, is, as I kind of was riffing on the evangelical ease earlier, pardon me, is learning to value things that shaped you, even things that are you might consider cringe, like Michael W. Smith's 80s stuff, like and yeah, I moved to a place where you value those things for what they were and what those people were trying to do at those times, and the authentic parts of themselves, or the parts that weren't, but that they formed and shaped you. And there's a way to honor that. There's a way to appreciate that work. And the wildest thing about that whole thing with Peterson is, like, if you consider yourself a Christian now, and he was the doorway, like, how do you not recognize the value in that, or at least the goodness of that in a way? But that does, I've had conversations with young men about that.
Me too. Yeah.
So
yeah, like, I literally made a new friend over Christmas, like, in my town. I'd never met him before in person, but he just happened to live across the street from a priest I know, and had this whole story of how he was an atheist, and he went down the Peterson rabbit hole, and now he's this, like, fervent Catholic. It's just like, wow, like, yeah, these stories are real. They're all over the place. And he's one of those guys who's definitely not embarrassed of the path he took. It still has lots of affection for Peterson, and is now wishing, kind of wistfully, like a lot of people, oh man, when's he gonna figure it out? When's he gonna come along? And I, way back in 2018, when I first started writing about this whole stuff, I, like a lot of people, I was excited. I was young. I was a young writer, and I maybe was a little bit naive, kind of thinking, gee, like, I really hope if you could just, like, read the right book, or talk to the right person. He seems like he might be close, and maybe in a couple more years, maybe he's gonna pop. I don't know. But as time went by, and he wasn't really changing. It was just kind of like variations on the same theme. And now here we are, and it's been 7 years, and he still hasn't popped, to use that's Paul Vanderklay's phrase. It's kind of thinking, okay, that was a little naive of me. He's been thinking about this stuff for decades. He's not just going to change tomorrow.
Yeah, recently, in the last several months, I went and tried to find, like, the earliest stuff on his channel, or that was out there, stuff from 2011, and I recognized what he was saying as things that he was saying in, like, 2018.
Yep.
And I was like,
yeah.
Okay,
Or you go back even farther. Like,
Yeah.
I tried to read Maps of Meaning.
I didn't even try.
Yeah, I think I got through, I don't know, like a third of it or something. I just gave up. It's too much. So I, like, We Who Wrestle with God now is it's sort of a throwback to that kind of writing. So now that he's got a couple of bestsellers, he's at the point where he can write what he wants. It's like, I talk about that a bit in the article. And you go back, there's a lot of the same stuff is in Massive Meaning, and that was published in, I don't know, 1998 or something.
Yeah.
Which then that material in turn he'd been working on since maybe the 80s or the 70s. So just keep going back. This has been his project for decades now.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with a friend last night, and kind of trying to think about this specifically, because I think Peterson identified something about Christianity that was true, that had been, and with Peugeot, like that got highlighted, and that became salient in a way, and so clearly contrasted to New Atheism, American culture, Western cultural Christianity, in a way that, but the mistake, I guess, that people or the criticism that people have is that, well, oh no, and then they look back and go, well, that wasn't Christianity. That, I would say that he identified something that was Christian that had been missing for a long time. Like, there was no voice sharing that part, like something about Christianity that was also true. And it's, to Peugeot, like, and the enchanted part, the symbolic part, something, and why there's so many of these people find themselves in these historical realities that, for, in some ways, like, in the mystical side of it, put the intellect on hold. Like, he opened that up in a way that's been part of Christianity for a very long time, but not in maybe the parts that had been active or seen or understood in Western civilization in the last several hundred years. And so it's not that he was giving the whole package, or like I don't know. That's something that I was kind of playing with last night.
He's very, there's a lot of Ecclesiastes energy in Peterson. He's like the teacher, right? Like, he's just sort of coming out, and I mean, it's basically like wisdom literature for the postmodern age is kind of what he was selling. And it was this sort of a, yeah, go ahead.
And that's not like wisdom. I mean, I think that's a great, I think that really hits on what I'm trying to say, because, the gospel centered movement's not teaching Proverbs, like,
yeah, right.
But we need it. But that's what I'm trying to say. Like, he was pointing at something that in some ways had been like abandoned as something meaningful in the discourse, related to, pick up your room, as the meme goes. It's like, no, accept Jesus and then everything's going to be okay. Like,
right. And so this also gets into the eternal dance between faith and works, right? Because Peterson's blind spot, and where he really struggles, is with understanding and accepting the gospel, what the gospel means, what it means to allow Jesus to do something for you that you can't do yourself. He really just can't wrap his brain around that, because he wants to do everything, right? So that's his blind spot. But maybe on the other side, maybe there can be a tendency with gospel-centered everything. There could be a tendency to sort of forget that James is in the Bible. It's like faith without works is dead. Like, there's stuff you got to do. Like,
I would say it's something about agency, about personal agency. And I've had this conversation, and maybe this is controversial, but there can be a tendency to a type of soft nihilism that what I do doesn't matter. Because of the good news. Like, okay, if it's all been done, then what do I do? And so and when he's speaking to me, and then so when I say about nihilism, it's like, well, what does my life mean if it's already been taken care of? And I experienced that within being kind of raised in a hyper dispensational reality. Like, it's all going to burn anyway, so we're just trying to make it to, like, there's like a little bit of nihilism that's at play. Or if you're on the reformed side of things, there's some nihilism that comes into play about, like, well, it's not in my control anyway, so throw my hands up. And I'm not. So that's what I think, that when that pragmatic side that was then being attached to something like religious symbology and even the foundational text of Genesis was kind of jarring. And like, well, maybe this can tell me something about how to live my life as well.
Right. Yeah. As you were saying that, I was thinking of this interesting moment during a panel discussion really early as Peterson was just emerging. This is one of the first things I saw of his in, I think, winter or spring of 2018. He was having a three-way with William Lane Craig and Steven Pinker's wife, whose name I'm blanking on, Rebecca something.
I remember it.
Yeah. And there was this moment where Peterson kind of got irritated with Craig because Craig had gotten up and done his, very neat, pat little opening statement like Craig always does, always has his ducks in a row, where he was sort of matter-of-factly saying, hey, but look, if Christianity isn't true, then like you were saying, it's all going to burn. None of this matters. It's all going into the void or whatever. And that seemed to touch a nerve for Peterson, because then when Peterson got up and was doing his thing, he was like, how can you say that? Like if you're comforting your sick child or whatever, you're not thinking to yourself, oh well, it's all going to burn anyway. Like this has meaning right now. It's like if you're listening to a beautiful symphony, just because the symphony is going to end doesn't mean that the symphony isn't meaningful while it's playing. So I turned that over in my head a lot. I really thought about that because I could see what Craig was trying to say, but I could also see what Peterson was trying to say. And in a sense, they were both getting at something true, and that like some work needs to be done to try and synthesize those things.
Yeah, so there's the nihilism of the non-theism, but there's also a nihilism of if God does everything and we don't have any agency, type thing, and so that is, I think that was a part for me in a rebuilding process of trying to rebuild something like self-respect. When I had transgressed people that I was charged to care for and love, and I really had a low, as I should in a certain way, opinion of myself. But then if you're going to change and repent and heal, you actually have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and not think that you're a POS, and so, there was a piece of that in there, that there's certain parts of like, well, I know that God's forgiven me. I believe that. I believe he even worked a miracle, but I still have to do something. Like I still have to and so like I was saying, there's like this slice of the pragmatic part of his message that really did help me.
Yeah.
And I know that even in this story of, we talked about just like the young man you met at, recently and stuff. And so that's why I'm actually going to the ARC conference, and I went to Symbolic
Yeah, me too.
World. Oh, you're going to be there? Okay. We need to connect on the app. So it's like, so well, that's exciting. We'll get to actually meet.
Yeah.
So because for me, there's a through line, and now to even again, like take it back to the apologetics side, in a certain way, it feels like it makes those make more sense now, when they are attached to, fighting for the veracity of the work of the written word, also in the, well, you even hit on that term, the faith and works. And in some of my conversations with Jordan Hall, we talked about faith. And I think that distinction between faith and belief is also one that, Peterson's famous line of it depends on what you mean by believe,
Yes.
that, so even to that very point, it seems like that distinction between faith and works is something, or faith and belief was something that he's also been poking at in a certain way.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and that comes out a lot. I don't know how much of the Daily Wire Gospels series you've checked out, but
Some.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of episodes at this point, and he he keeps circling back to that over and over again. I will say though that I mean Peterson can sometimes have a habit, and this is one thing that does irritate me a little bit about him, is that sometimes he can sort of act as if he's discovered some incredibly novel thing that Christians haven't been thinking seriously about for centuries and centuries, right? Uh, so it's like, you realize, Peterson, there's like whole shelves full of systematic theology. And I mean, it's not like Christians are unaware of the importance of works. Like, this is how many sermons, like,
Yeah.
just like lots of ordinary preachers have talked about this and are aware of this, and lots of Christians are aware of this, that like you gotta, I mean, there's plenty of evangelicalese about like putting hands and feet to faith, that kind of thing, right?
Right.
Um, walking the walk, right?
Mhm.
Living my faith out, So I think a lot of Christians actually do get that,
Yeah.
and understand that.
Definitely. Yeah, it's easy to be hard on, you know, on yourself or where you've come from. You wrote another, so I've kind of, again, kind of tangentially seen you and known you in this space, but um, I didn't really realize that you were a writer. I think maybe I kind of made that connection whenever you had that little back and forth with Matt Walsh on Twitter. I think you did, wasn't that? Yeah. So, what was this year in review for you? I read your Substack on that. The interesting thing that came to me was you'd said I'd considered starting a podcast, but then people I've talked to said how much it takes away from the writing and all this stuff, and I would say back to you, like, I considered starting a Substack this year, but it was like thinking that would be hard to put on top of what.
Yeah. So the lesson here is it's really hard to do both of those things, right? Like, whichever one you're currently doing, it's, if you try to do the other thing as well, it's gonna, yeah. And I mean, me personally, I just struggle. I'm very ADHD. I'm not great with time management. Um, I struggle to even get the work done that I have, like even my writing work done. I also have contract writing that I do even aside from the Substack stuff. So yeah, I think I need to spend some more time cleaning my room in Peterson terms, before I can really think about taking on something like that, because it could be fun, but it would be a lot. Just because you have to prepare, like if you're, because I was envisioning it as like a conversations podcast, like, maybe kind of like a female Christian Joe Rogan kind of thing. Um, and I definitely know a lot of interesting people, even some higher profile people, and we could have a lot of fun. But I'd really have to refresh, like, okay, read whatever books of theirs that they've been doing lately, think about my points, make notes, blah blah blah. That takes time. So, and once you kind of get on that train, the train just keeps going, and you have to like kind of keep feeding the content beast.
Yep.
Um, and that's something I think about a lot as a writer. I think about sort of the perils of getting caught in a trap of content creation, right? Um, and constantly feeling like, oh, I have to write a thing about the thing, right? Like whatever everybody's talking about on Twitter this week, it's like, oh no, do I have to put out a take because everyone else is, right? So I gotta, and that's something I consciously try to fight in my own work. It's like sometimes I just allow a cycle to pass me by and I don't write anything about it, and that's okay. Like, I didn't need to.
It's like a discipline of
Yeah.
like it's a certain kind of discipline of withholding yourself from something for. I mean, I've heard Luke Thompson talk about for mammon. Like because you're kind of talking about the content churn, and yeah, I can say that in this last year of experiencing kind of trying to stay in like a certain kind of a part of a certain conversation within culture or within kind of this corner and these kinds of things, like there is that temptation or that tendency to be like, oh, I've got to be a part of that. And but we have our
You
limits.
saw that, like, with Wes and Rogan.
Yep.
I mean, it was just insane. It became this ridiculous, like almost an infinite loop of content. Like, my response to Wes and Rogan, my response to the response to the response to the response.
Are
And
you
it's
are
just
you
like,
are you are you hearkening to Ruslan's response to that? Because
he's part of that, sure. Or like, like Alex, but then like William Lane Craig was on Sean McDowell's show responding to Alex, responding to, and then like Gavin Ortland did a
yeah,
thing, and then Alex responded to Gavin, responding to Alex,
that
responding to
well,
Wes.
the
It was
reason I
like,
brought up Ruslan is because he made in the intro to him that then he put him in conversation with Alex O'Connor. There was like he did this short little video montage of that. And it was at that moment that I realized, oh, Alex O'Connor is Christian YouTube now. He's not New Atheism. He's actually like in Christian YouTube.
Well, Christian YouTube is, I mean, they definitely feel like they have to engage him. I mean, like I was seeing Glenn Scrivener, and I like Glenn. This is not like a knock on Glenn, but it seems like almost every other time Alex puts out a video now, Glenn is like immediately there with like, the top 3 things from Alex's latest video. And hey, like Glenn's got to feed his own content beast, so it's
It's like
all good.
low hanging fruit or something, that to that point of like commenting on this and this, give the people what they want. The question I think that you are asking, that I hope that I'm asking, is, am I really curious about this, or am I just trying to, say something relevant in the moment?
Yeah, right. Am I actually interested in this topic for its own sake? Do I think this is this something that I want to chew on for myself and not just for likes and clicks? Yeah.
Yeah, and so to that point, to take it back to the earlier part of the conversation about Wes Huff, because I didn't feel, I mean, it was actually your response to it that was more interesting to me, because it redeemed something about apologetics, because, and I don't know if you could help me put my finger on what the way, how you saw that, not just in the technical, but the vibe shift. Like, what was it about this change that maybe for somebody like myself, or for other people maybe listening, that there was something redemptive about the apologetic discourse related to that event, that kind of cultural event?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing hopefully positive and hopefully lasting shifts in how apologetics is done moving forward. I think that, and I was unpacking some of this earlier, but the way that apologists worked before was in sort of a debate era, where like I make my opening statement, you make yours, we do a rebuttal, we cross-examine, and it's all sort of stiff and formal and very time limited. And so then they came up with ways of trying to like present the case for Christianity that were like very bite-sized, and I think unnecessarily constraining, and like not really taking a forward position, and just like unlocking all of the details and the nuance, and the fun stuff that you could, because they were like, we got to just come up with like 5 points that we can hand to a skeptic in under 5 minutes, because that's how much time we have in our debates. So I think that it gave apologetics a bit of a canned feel, maybe like just like warm it up in the microwave and go. And I think that gets stale after a while. So I think now, with Rogan, it represents this new media age where people are binging podcasts. His conversations are 3 hours long. It's this very laid back format. It's not like this sort of gladiatorial competition, right, in a debate arena. It's not like that. It's, hey man, let's just hang out and chat for 3 hours about whatever. So then that is a great opportunity, I think, to represent apologetics in a fresher way, a more detailed way, where you're not putting these artificial constraints on yourself. And then I think you can bring out new treasure, and you can look at the Gospels with fresh eyes. So then that, you could never unspool something like the name statistics argument, or the argument from like geography, or like how are the canonical Gospels different from the Gnostic texts? Well, they get all of these interesting details right. Oh yeah, but like what? Well, like this, and blah blah blah. Like that kind of stuff. You never got into that with the old debates, because there wasn't any time. So I think a lot of this partly is dovetailing with the new media shift and the amount of time you have to talk about stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting, because like, say, what if Wes Huff in a year goes back and has another conversation with Rogan? Like, it kind of creates a continuity to a conversation versus like you're saying, the intensity of debate and the compressed nature of what they were trying to do. I think it's like letting these arguments kind of breathe a little
Yeah,
bit.
exactly. Yep.
That's really fascinating. Um, well, I guess, yeah, and that makes sense why it would, it's what I'm trying to do is I call it my thumbnails say conversation craft, trying to figure out what this means, that we can do this now, and that we are doing this, which is kind of, a question I guess I wanted to ask you is like, um, paying attention to people like Paul in this corner of the internet and others mentioned Sam earlier, like, to the part that you do pay attention to, what do you think, like, how would you define what Paul's been doing in this
Mm.
corner of the internet?
Yeah, so I think Paul's great strength is he has a very pastoral heart. Um, he really cares about the little people, um, and he talks about estuaries, and he's done some interesting videos thinking about stuff like Ark and how Ark is fun for what it is, but the way it's set up currently, it kind of has some limitations. Um, it's a very high status sort of thing. It's um, kind of slanted towards, a bunch of well-heeled people get into a room and listen to some high status people on a stage giving lectures or having panel discussions or whatnot. And maybe there's like a cocktail mixer. I mean, I'm my app. I'm looking. Okay, Arc in the evening. Here's my regional. This. Here's my. Like. Ooh. Okay.
You're still young enough to go to the young leaders version. I'm
Yeah.
81.
Oh no. Yeah. I actually decided to go to the my North American regional thing just because I think probably more of the people I'm interested in engaging with are going to be older. But so like I'm glad that opportunity is there. But overall, it seemed I don't think I think they're still figuring out how to organize it in a way that really facilitates conversations, to use Paul's phrase. So, and I came across this really sad comment that I sent to Paul, and then he read it out on one of the little videos the other day. I was flipping through the Daily Wire uh, and the Foundations of the West series, and they have these little mini episodes where Peterson has dinner with whoever, Peugeot, Spencer Clavin, and so there was this dinner that Spencer and Peterson were having in Athens, and somebody left a comment saying, it's really difficult for me to watch videos like this because I just want somebody that I can have these kinds of conversations with. And there's nobody in my life who can do that. And I went, like, I even got a master's degree in philosophy, thinking maybe that would like make me cooler, basically make people want to have convos, but it's like the opposite. And so here I am, I'm just kind of sitting by myself watching Peterson and Clavin have those conversations. It's kind of like I have my nose pressed against the window and they're having something, they're enjoying a feast that's not mine. So I think that Paul is creating spaces where people can find each other, people can have those kinds of interactions. And that's valuable because there's such a loneliness epidemic. There's so many misfits out there, so many people who don't feel understood, who don't have friends. We're such an atomized culture. Thick in-person community is just not a thing the way that it used to be. So many people just live their lives online. So I think, calling Paul the internet's pastor is a kind of an apt phrase.
Wow. There's several things there. My first conversation that I tried to host and start this podcast with was with a guy named Pete, who runs a channel called Strange Theology. And I'd seen him pop up on one of Paul's live streams on like a Friday. And that kind of played into me being like, oh, I think I'm going to do something in here. And he said, watching Joe Rogan, it's like, how many times did I feel like I wish I could be in that conversation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the friction now technically, and Paul is just doing this over and over again. Guy with 30,000 subs says, hey, come on in and play. And there's 150 people watching. And it's like, now you're actually in the conversation that people are watching.
Yeah.
And it's like you matter. you feel like you're a part of something, that you matter. And it's not that
Yeah.
you feel that, it's actually that you do, and you are mattering in that way. And
Mhm.
it's through this, it's interesting, the person the comment you saw, the person's like sitting there watching this on their phone or at home. And it's like, I wish I could be a part of that conversation. And I think that is one of the striking, well, the piece that was salient for me was like, well, what, of course, if you take 7 years of content, it's like, and you never get to talk about it, that's a problem. And, especially when it's this intellectually, psychologically, dense, even, and you're a layperson, but you're like, well, this is changing the way I see the world. It's changing my consciousness, and a part of that process, I think, then is to bring it into a conversation, or maybe even at some point into a lecture or something, something. So yeah, I feel kindred to that experience myself, but also hopefully like doing something about that as
Yeah.
well. I think that's really great. And I'm trying to think of the other piece that you mentioned with um, on that, Paul. The arc part of it is, to me, it's a scaled up version of estuary. That was the thing I was gonna. I mean, did you go? Were you invited to the last one, or did you? Yeah. So
This will be my first time. Yeah.
yeah. So the app is interesting because there's a messaging feature. You can kind of rate these connections you have with
I saw
people.
that. I thought that was really dumb. I'm like, what is it, like rating people like their restaurants or something? It's like, yes, I give this person 2 stars. Like the main course was great, but the wine was a little off. Like, what is
Well,
this?
I mean, there are people that I've met that are going to be there, or I met some of Symbolic World, and so like I'm like, well, these people are more salient to me, and then somebody's reaching out to me that I've never met. Like, well,
Right.
I'm okay if like if I sent I sent a few comments out to people, and I was like, I expect to be 1 star on this person's salience. Like, that's, I mean, I think that's real. I'm like, I just expect that.
The relevance realization.
Yeah, they
Right.
don't know me from Adam, speaking of the atomization, but it's like,
Uh,
but
uh,
it,
uh.
but it is, I mean, that is an attempt at something, the mixers and whatnot. But it's not as explicit as like making, an hour or 2 hour estuary conversation a part of the conference liturgy, so.
Yeah, and I mean, and the other thing that I was getting at too is, like Paul was really great at finding the kind of people who would never have, the means or the time or the connections to be invited to something like ARC, you know, because it really is for people like that. You're going to meet, um, young leaders and thinkers, entrepreneurs, politicians, people in tech or business or the arts or whatever. So like these are all like careerists, right? These are
Right.
people who've made it in some sense at their respective fields. And that's fine. I think it's great for there to be events like this where people like that get to come together and share ideas. But it's not it's not where real ministry happens, if you're a pastor.
So what do you do with that though, if you're a person that likes, that says, like, say, I mean, Konstantin Kisin from Trigonometry, Robert Barron, Jonathan Pajot, like these are some of the people that were hiring my salience last time. And I was like, so you say you've consumed hundreds of hours of these people's content, yet the place where they go and present like the criticism of, well, this isn't for the people, but you are the people that has made them what they are by consuming what they've done, hopefully the good work they've done.
Sure.
Um,
Now, and of course, Barron is a bishop, and so um, he has his own pastoral capacity, and so I'm sure he has like his own kind of local community, people he knows who know him, who keep him grounded. Maybe someone like Paul, though on a higher scale.
yeah.
Um, but um, but but yeah, for sure. I think there can be a sort of a barrier. There could be it's like Paul's always talking about the status rocket, right? How status binds and blinds, and the higher you go up, the more difficult it is to kind of come back to earth. Um, and I've thought a lot about this. Paul was talking about this with you, actually. I remember I was watching one of your convos, and he was saying that he, you know, it seems like Peterson probably in some ways misses his old life, like kind of
Mhm.
misses who he used to be when he was just a prof, just a clinician. And he had all of these wonderful, quiet relationships that he'd built with students and clients. Just got to know him really well as just their prof, or just their therapist. And he didn't have all of this fame and stuff. Uh, he didn't have a demand to be constantly creating this content for this audience of millions who were never going to know the real Jordan, right? So probably, I mean, I'm sure that he wouldn't do anything differently, because I think he really believes he's sort of called to this in some sense. Like, well, I got to do this. This is my mission. I got to spread my message. He's an evangelist in that sense. But I'm sure he misses what that life used to be like.
Yeah, and he talks a lot about sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, but it's the dynamic's interesting. I have this thesis that I'm working at as I traverse this digital subscriptions and clicks and relationships also in the space. It's like I'm interested in the friction. There's like these sectors that I've identified in this corner, like Discord. Having somebody's phone number versus a Discord chat versus a live stream versus a podcast versus inviting somebody with status versus somebody that is a rando that you say, hey, you want to come do a podcast with me? I think I'm experimenting with this stuff, and what does it mean when the friction is a lot lower digitally, and how these things operate, and is because I do believe that there's a really hard fast the Dunbar stuff is, I mean, even within relationships in here, but in your real life, the Dunbar thing is very, I think, real, and it's something that needs to be honored and contended with more than something to try to pass through or break through. Even though
What's
that
Dunbar?
this dude, I think he was in the 80s or 90s, that said he outlined these numbers, and church growth people that have been in the church growth, they're familiar with this stuff, which I was a part of. But then I started hearing it mentioned in some of the TLC conversation, mainly with Jordan Hall. It's like we only have like the relational capacity for like in-depth relationship for around 120 to 150 people, and then that number can scale up and down depending on maybe your skill, your people skill, whatever that means. And then there's, so you can see how that would map onto like pastoral ministry and church sizes and stuff like that. um and so then there's the these, when they outline church sizes, I think that, so the Dunbar number is like that first number. And so there's something about like growth versus scale related to what you're doing. um and I think that there's something even related to the mechanization of scale of industry versus like the growth of garden. And then that even takes me to the ideas about like, that the eschatological vision of the garden in the middle of the city. And I haven't really worked some of this stuff out, but there's just these pieces that I'm thinking about with that stuff.
And of course, then you got Paul Kingsnorth out there saying cities are bad, civilization, the fall happened, and then civilization happened, and the industrial blah blah.
What do you
blah.
think about that?
Well, I wrote a whole piece on that actually,
Okay.
called Strangers and Sojourners. Kingsnorth is an interesting dude. He's like this kind of like druid who's come out of the middle of nowhere to give us all a good scolding. So it was entertaining for sure. It's fun whenever the hippie gives the keynote. But I mean, yeah, I had criticisms. I think he just on a few different points. I mean, I think civilization is not necessarily bad. And Peter Lightheart had something about the Zitverse things that was also good, but I just don't automatically connect that with sin or with the fall. I think man has built things that point to God. I think about like the great cathedrals, right? Like great architecture, the beauty of that. I think also, when Case North is looking at the Sermon on the Mount and some of the words of Jesus, he's inclined towards maybe a radical kind of pacifism, or a radical opposition to wealth creation. Maybe capitalism is inherently bad. I mean, it seems like he's sort of at least playing with those ideas. And I would disagree there too. I mean, I think obviously wealth accumulation can be bad for some people, and it can intersect with vice, and it can be. There's some people who it's like Jesus says to the rich young ruler, like, you just gotta shed this, like, give it all up, come follow me. Maybe some people need that. They need that kind of radical call. But I don't think you can extrapolate that out to a general moral principle. I think that really kind of depends on the person. So yeah. Anyway, I outline all of that in that piece. It's that somebody. I was just thinking about that when you mentioned the city and like the garden of the city, because after his talk, somebody was asking him about the city in Revelation, and the way that Paul tries to answer that is, well, God builds that city. It's a city not built by human hands, so that's okay. Like, as long as God is building it. I think there might be more to that. Anyway, that's a whole really fascinating topic unto itself.
That was one of the most redemptive things. I remember leading this class on. It was a Tim Keller study, and I can't remember which one it was. But he talked about, because his whole thesis on the city, that was kind of a big part of his ministry.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I think, yeah, Christ in the city, the church in the city, that was Keller's whole shtick, if you can call it that, is right. And some people would even say maybe too much. Maybe the city influenced Keller as much as Keller influenced the city.
I think for me, and the conversation I had with Jordan Hall, it's that our definition of city is, well, I don't know if perverted is the right word. It's tainted by the megatropolis, which I would say is more than a city. It's multiple cities, trying to operate as one city, when it really, like, our capacity for like a good city is actually a lot smaller than that. But we might even call a town of 30 or 60,000, or a city of 30, 60,000 a town instead of an actual city, but the, yeah, then that has been part of the Jordan Hall thing. But I have critiques of, when I was mentioning the church growth thing, Keller was pro megachurch. He, in his church growth article that he wrote, he did make the argument that megachurches could provide more good than small churches, at the end of it. And so, like, yeah, like you said, the critique that would kind of tie into some of that overemphasis on scale, as a metric for good.
Yeah, and I do think, yeah, and I need to read some more Keller, because I don't want to like misrepresent him. But in what I've read so far, and some of the criticisms I've seen people make of him, I think he was very, like you're saying, very focused on growth, very focused on missiology. Like, okay, what's going to make this click for people so they start coming and filling up our pews? How do we expand this? And it's like, that's not that. That can be good. Like, it can bear fruit. It's not like that's necessarily bad. But then I think problems can come in when you start prioritizing that at the expense of some other things. And also, it can lead you to be harsh and dismissive towards other Christians who, in your mind, aren't living up to your missiological ideal.
Yeah, that the part of that is, the telos of evangelicalism is, how many people can we get to hear the good news? So there's
Right.
like a relationship to the number, with which you were pointing on with like missiology.
Yeah, and I think.
And I was just going to make one more point, which is that what's interesting about the converts from the Jordan Peterson mission and evangelism are all going to like small churches. Not all, but like a lot.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
some. I mean, it depends. Like some people are becoming ortho bros. Like some are
Yeah.
becoming Catholic.
Yeah.
I wish I had kind of a better sense on exactly where they're going, but I think mega churches definitely are not where they're going first. Like we could probably safely say that. But yeah, I was just going to add to to the you were saying evangelicalism, right? There was I could see in Keller because Keller was trying to be the quintessential evangelical. There's lots of friction between the evangelical and the fundamentalist, right? Um, and fundamentalism can become a kind of a dirty word, and the fundamentalists are those people over there who are um, turning off the people the evangelicals are trying to talk to. So I saw this a lot in Keller that he would lots over and over again he would bring up fundamentalist or fundamentalism, and it was consistently negative. Like it was it was almost never good when he brought up those words because he was criticizing how those people framed things, and got in the way of the sort of work he wanted to do. You could often see a lot of tension between Keller and fundamentalism or fundamentalists. Um, and whenever he would use those words in what he wrote, it was pretty much never good. It was always, here's what fundamentalists are doing wrong. Here's how they're like very unmissiological and they're getting in the way of the kind of work that I want to do because they're turning off the sort of people I want to reach. Maybe the New York kind of people, the blue state people, where I'm trying to assure these people that Christianity is smart. Christianity is adaptable, it's reasonable, it's cool, and you guys are over here being weird. So let's just stop that. But sometimes you need to keep Christianity weird, like to use Tom Holland's phrase.
Oh, that is a great critique because I think like as a guy that did like the modern worship rock stuff for a long time. There's my kids bought me this stuff. um because I've got my electric guitar right over here at the studio, but I think like their music was like kind of highball jazz orchestral stuff, like, but but even like within the Protestant ethos of low symbology, low imagery stuff, that is some of the weirdness, and that's not that much different than trying to be a seeker church in a way. um so I think and so a lot of the people that are getting in through some weird stuff like like symbols and psychological, even people that have come through these guys from using psychedelics, um are coming into these spaces, wanting there to be some other aspects that are distinctly Christian in their art and their form and everything. So that would be maybe something we could have seen as a blind spot. We'll never know because it would have been so interesting to see Keller see this. So yeah, well, as we're kind of winding down here, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, Paul's been putting forth this idea of metagelicalism. Do you have any thoughts on that as we're kind of closing down?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we need a new word necessarily. I'm a little bit allergic to making up new words, new terms for stuff. I think the word ecumenism is perfectly good, and it kind of probably captures a lot of the same things that Paul's trying to get at. So, if I'm understanding correctly, what he's talking about, I think he's just sort of talking about a willingness for people across denominations to work together and um, make culture together, and sort of present a kind of a unified mere Christianity, you could say, I guess, to the world. So like you've got Catholic people working together with evangelicals on The Chosen. Um, you have the stuff that Bishop Barron is doing. You have, yeah, like all these people mixing and matching and talking to each other. And I don't know that I have any super profound thoughts to add. Just that I'm a very ecumenical kind of person myself. I like seeing Protestants and Catholics work together to do cool things. I mean, certainly there's a long history of that happening in political spaces with things like the pro-life movement. Lots of fertile cross-pollination between Protestants and Catholics there. So I think it's great as long as the message of mere Christianity isn't diluted too much. And I do think, like, I don't really watch the Chosen show. It's not my tea so much, and I do kind of worry that maybe they are in their eagerness to try to do something new. Maybe they are kind of watering down some of the theology there. So I do have a bit of that. Yeah, I have a very old-fashioned streak in me where I'm like, I don't know if like all this stuff is equally cool. But yeah, it's cool for people to work together and share ideas, and I think good not to get too lost in the weeds of denominational distinctives, because it's not that I don't think those are important. Obviously, I'm Protestant for a reason. I have my particular flavor of Protestantism is correct, I think, obviously, or I wouldn't hold it. But I would never want to, as I'm going out there trying to present Christianity, present what it is, I wouldn't want people to feel like, unless you convert to my very bespoke brand thereof, you're not really getting it. That would be a mistake, I think.
ARC is ecumenical.
I missed most of that question.
Do you think ARC is ecumenical?
Do I think ARC is ecumenical? I mean, I don't think of ARC as a religious project per se. I think of it as more of a social project or a political project, even though a lot of Christians are involved in it. So to that extent, sure, there's lots of different kinds of Christians in the mix there. So in that sense, I think it's ecumenical. But I think of it as more of like an interfaith, like one of those kind of interfaith dialogues that people used to have, but hopefully less silly and more fruitful, because yeah, there's a history of that kind of stuff just going in circles and not being helpful.
And the last piece of that is, what about the gospel series by Peterson?
Right. I found that to be a very interesting watch, because I had a lot of apprehensions about it actually going in, because I just kind of worried, like, just looking at the lineup, and like, is this just gonna follow a bunch of irrelevant rabbit trails and never actually get down to the text? Is it just gonna like keep missing the point episode after episode? And there is some of that, I think. I'm not gonna lie. There's, I mean, a lot of time does get wasted, I think. But having Bishop Barron there was good and helpful, at least for the first half of it. Now he had to go somewhere for the last 4 or 5 episodes. They brought in Konstantin Kisin instead, who like Konstantin, and like he just, I'm sorry, but he was pretty useless. Like he sat there and said like almost nothing. And so I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know why they didn't find like another Catholic to replace Bishop Barron. But anyway, when Barron was there, I think he did a great job trying to anchor the whole thing in the actual gospel, like who Jesus actually is, what this is actually saying. And I was impressed by other guys too. Like I really enjoyed Greg Hurwitz. He came at it from like a storytelling point of view, and he really consistently impressed me with some of the insights he brought. I liked Stephen Blackwood. James Orr, another really good, interesting voice. He's actually the guy who invited me to ARC. So I think James brought a nice kind of gentle Lewisian flavor. He's got that Cambridge man, erudite English, classicist vibe kind of going. And so he was very helpful to have there, I think. So like on the whole, I was pleasantly surprised. I think it was a nice series, but at the same time, I think there is a lot of white noise in there with guys like Vervaeke and with Peterson himself, just sort of not really grasping the nettle of what these passages are about.
Well, Bethel, we've gone along a winding road in this conversation, but I've really, really enjoyed it. And I appreciate you meeting me here and accepting the invitation to practice some conversation craft here today with me. So
Thanks so much. It's been a blast. Enjoy it.
awesome. I'm glad. All right. Stick around before backstage. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.